Hello, 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 everybody. Happy Friday. It is that time once again. Settle in, grab a drink, because we are in for some Friday night frights. We've got what's probably going to be an interesting one for you all this month. But before we get into the festivities, I, of course, need to intro the co host with the most, the only man that I want to be exploring the macabre and creepy with, the definition of scary himself, Christian Ashley.
High praise. Thanks, Joe.
And as we get going, y'all that are going to be tuning in this month, the bar was set last time.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you all have a mission. You all have a goal. Make sure that when you jump into the chat that you talk, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever seen any black-eyed children, if you've ever experienced this phenomena. So, of course, as the marquee says, we are talking about black eyed children. Um, I'm curious to know where you first found out about this phenomenon because I'm actually going to hold off my telling of this until a little bit later on in the show. So where was the first time you heard about black eyed children?
Well, that's an excellent question because honestly, I don't remember. It had to have been a paranormal or supernatural podcast that I was listening to, or maybe one of the general ones that cover beyond stuff like that go into cryptozoology and ufology as well. I listened to like dozens of them, so remembering the name, who knows? And it was like, what the hell are these things? I want none of them in my life. If this is real, no,
Right.
I'm done.
Yeah. There's something particularly unnerving about this one in particular. And for me it's unnerving like many because like you're talking about like ghost children. Like no thank you. I'm good. I want absolutely nothing to do with any of that. Namely because like it's just there's something extra creepy and I think it's part of that perversion of innocence that
Yes.
we see. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
kids are
my
supposed to be
gosh.
these pure beings and then like to see like the ghost of a child like even in movies growing up and stuff like that like that was the hard no for me
Mm.
growing up.
Oh yeah. Hearing these stories, it's always terrified me, and I was like, "Why is that? Like, why am I terrified of this and not like I don't know, killer alien or what have you?" And it's like, oh, it's because I really love children. I love working with children. I've done that multiple times over in my life. I've worked as a tutor. I've worked, in the church, in children's care, youth ministry, and so on and so forth. And like imagining those kids that I love, that I pour into their lives in, and then suddenly one of them is now this twisted humanoid abomination that's trying to do whatever to me by getting inside my house or car. It terrifies me because that's antithetical to what I know. And that's not to say children are some innocent and perfect being out there, because once you've worked with children, you know they're not perfect. But they're working on things. They're learning things. Most of them are attempting to be better. So to have something that's like, nope, I'm upfront about it. I'm going to be creepy. I'm going to like kill everybody in your house if you let me in. That's a no for me, dog. Stay away.
Yep. Yep. So there are conflicting reports about where these originated, but the most common comes from the year of our Lord 1996. So as we get this thing going, I want you all to do me a favor. Let's turn the clock back to 1996 when everyone was doing the Macarena and watching Friends. It was a quiet night in 1996. Brian Bethel, a journalist from Abilene, Texas, was sitting in his car outside a movie theater, parked under the dim glow of a streetlight. He was scribbling a check, lost in thought, the hum of the city settling into a soft silence around him. And then a knock at the window. Startled, Brian looked up. Standing outside his driver's side window were two young boys, no older than maybe 10, 12. They were dressed normally, hoodies, jeans, but something felt off. An uneasy feeling settled into Brian's chest, though he couldn't quite place why. The taller of the two boys spoke up first. Mister, we need a ride. We forgot our money, and we need to get home to grab it. Can you take us? His voice was steady, polite, but just something about the way he spoke sent a chill up Brian's spine. He found himself gripping the steering wheel tighter subconsciously. Something just wasn't right. The way they stood, it was just too still. The way their presence filled the space with an unnatural pressure. But most of all, Brian couldn't shake the overwhelming, inexplicable sense of dread hurling in his gut. Then he looked into their eyes. Black, pitch black. No pupils, no irises, just two endless voids where their eyes should have been. Brian's breath caught in his throat. His instincts screamed, do not open the door. But the boy spoke again, his tone even more insistent this time. Come on, mister. We can't get in unless you say it's okay. Just let us in the car. That was when Brian snapped out of it. His hand shot for the gear shift, his foot to the accelerator. The boys' expressions darkened, their polite facade slipping into something more sinister. He threw the car into reverse, tires screeching against the pavement. And just like that, they were gone. Brian drove home in a daze, heart pounding. Later that night, he shared his experience online, never expecting the flood of responses. Other people, strangers from other parts of the country, had seen them too. Children with black eyes, the ones who ask to be let in, and those who do let them in. Well, no one says exactly what happens after that. So a little bit of a recount of the initial setting of the Black Eyed Children from 1996, um, from Brian Bethel. Again, there are some reports that say that maybe this was from the 80s initially, and all of that, but most commonly, if you look for what the origin story of this is, it's this account from the 90s. So typical descriptions, right? Pale skin, all black eyes, monotone voices, strange behavior. They ask to be let into cars or houses, and people feel overwhelming fear. And it's even said by some that when you do let them in, it is an omen of bad luck. It is not good. It's going to lead to misfortune or illness or something along those lines. So, I'm curious. Kid comes knocking at your window. Will you let me in? You gonna let him in?
Well, really, it kind of depends. Because my instinct would to be to say yes, but as someone who grows up a lot in stories like this, especially your older folk tales of fair folk trying to get inside where they shouldn't be in, or demons trying to do the
Yeah.
same. My skepticism meter would go off, so I'm definitely going to be looking at eyes first before I do that because that's a classic trope of mythology is the invitation inside. It's how vampires are allowed to get inside. It's supposed to be some kind of like almost a holy protection over the threshold that prevents creatures that normally would just be able to barge in and just murder people senselessly. Like there's some almost divine protection preventing them from just attacking willy nilly. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna say no, unless I feel pretty dang certain it's someone I know, or they really do look like they're in distress.
Well, see that's the thing. Like, okay, so you raise a really good point about the whole mythology thing and this whole idea of um like the commonalities in all of this. And for some people, there there is a that is in and of itself a reason to disregard
Hmm.
something like this. But for me, that little factoid actually has a different reaction that has a different effect on me, and part of it is my background, my experiences, stuff like that. But part of it is when you have a series of stories, what is the origin of the story, and are literally every single one of them fake? So our show sits in the corner of the larger ethos of the world of the Anazao podcast network. And a lot of the shows within the AMP network are geared towards the Christian perspective, both of us being Christians ourselves. And so there are several accounts from the Old Testament of the Christian Bible that have roots and have versions and flavors for other civilizations and other cultures and things like that. And why do I bring that up? Well, I'm not going to sit here and get into the back and forth about whether or not there was a flood, whether or not it was 7 days or 7,000 years or whatever, or any of that sort of stuff. But what I am going to bring up is the fact that other cultures have a flood narrative, other cultures have creation narratives, other cultures have different. But they have the savior model. They have the same kind of model of a coming hero that came and did something and saved a group of people. Now they're not all the same. They're not all exact carbon copies of each other, but there's a lot of similarities to them, right? Well, at some point when you're looking at storytelling, when you're looking at the art of storytelling, when you're looking at the art of myth and the art of folklore and how folklore comes about and what we do with different carbon copies of the same essential narrative. Like the beats are the same. The specifics might not be, but the overarching tone is the same. What do you do with that? Well, we believe in a divine intervention of some kind, whatever it looks like, into the creation of the universe. We believe in different aspects of scripture that are supernatural in nature that have versions and flavors in other cultures. So the prime is already pumped to say these sorts of things need to come from someplace. There is an origin point to the myth. There is an origin point to the story. There is an origin point to the folklore. So I posit this question for consideration before we get into other accounts, before we get into facts that support this particular narrative. What if a rose by any other name? What if there is a commonality for a reason? Because you could point to multiple different supernatural entities that sound a lot like this. And depending on your denomination, depending on your particular flavor of Christianity, some more than others. Like for some, there's a multiplicity of spiritual entities. And even for the people that don't have a super wide buffet of options, there's still a solid two or three that you could point to that have this same kind of narrative of they need permission to cross the threshold.
Yeah. Well, sorry, for everyone out there, I am in the midst of allergy season, so I'm fighting for my life to breathe. So if there's sniffles and uh, coughing, that's why I'm trying not to bring that on the mic. But there's only so much I can stop. But in regards to what you actually said, yeah, I'm completely 100% on your side. You know that could be an easy way out of saying, well, the stories are always the same. So therefore, if someone else says it again, I can discount it. I don't discount that out of hand. I'm skeptical about it. Don't get me wrong. If you stories, if by beats, they're the exact same thing. Okay, is someone unoriginal? Is someone just trying to get their name out there or something? But then, if this is how these entities, whatever the heck they are, work, why fix what's not broken? Why,
Yeah.
why mess with their own mythology in that sense? If like that's how they're supposed to work, whatever they are. Um, and it's just that weird thing too of the uncanny valley that we're dealing with these black-eyed kids, black-eyed children. If you don't know what that is, I'm going to dumb it down because I'm dumb. It's the idea of there's something wrong with what I'm looking at. It's your classic case in sci-fi being like robots look enough like human beings, but they're not quite there yet. So there's a feeling of unease. So you'll have people speculate out there, well, maybe there was something else out there that kind of sort of looked like humans, but there was something off about them. And that like causes an uneasiness. And that explains why a lot of the people encountering these entities kind of go, there's something wrong here. These are kids, but there's something I'm noticing. Maybe my brain's not picking up the words for it, but there's something off. There's something that wants to harm me and those around me. And that's why the spidey sense kind of goes off and they don't invite him in. And there's also the idea of, well, we have the stories of the people who listen to their instincts, and what actually happened to the people who didn't is they got, and that's why we don't hear their story.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, there's something to the fact that those different people who didn't listen to their instincts, you don't hear from them again. Now, I do want to warn everybody watching, if you are existentialist in nature, if you are the type of person who you don't like things like simulation theory, if stuff like that like really freaks you out and all of that sort of stuff, um wade into the waters of uncanny valley with caution, because some of the larger, like, yes, in movies and things like that, sci-fi, like robots, like humanoid, that sort of thing, that's a flavor of it, and that is one that more movies and things like that are made of out of. But like some of the beats of uncanny valley and the, especially when you get into extra dimensional theory and different things like that, there are, like, it gets weird, it gets it gets freaky, and it gets to the level of actually questioning existence as a whole. um there's also very scientific and very grounded, well, I should say, because what I just explained is also a form of science, as far as the quantum theory and all of that jazz. But like there's very like grounded scientific thought processes about what is uncanny valley. Is it a defense mechanism against death and all of that sort of stuff? Like, is it that sort of thing? Like, there's a lot that goes into that. But I think that has a really big part as to we why kids, why this model. If there is a legitimacy to this, and not everybody is just making stuff up, then why is it kids? Because it's and that goes to two things. One is this whole uncanny valley thing. You think about younger people, right? Younger people, if you look at your standard young person, it's a lot more common to find a young person that like looks like any other, like looks very generic, looks like very boilerplate, all of that sort of stuff. There's not as many extreme differences from one person to another. It really doesn't come until you kind of grow into your body or grow into your looks. Is that true straight across the board? No, but I think that there is more of a soft template that you can work with when targeting kids. Also, if I'm an entity and my whole shtick is to gain the trust of people, so that way let they invite me in, again, perversion of innocence. What better person to like, you, the only next best thing that you go off of than kids is a woman in distress. Like, I don't mean to be standard there, but like, you see somebody like me knocking at your door and being like, hey, let me in, with my long beard and long hair and all of that sort of jazz. I'm gonna be like, please, no, like, no one's home, you know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between that and a kid. And so I think to me, before I even get into the other stuff, and again, in the words of the great philosopher The Rock, sit down and enjoy the ride, because we're getting there. We're getting there. But again, we're teasing it here. That we'll get to some of the other stories, including my own. But before any of that, reason to me, if I'm even considering the supernatural, which again, as we talked about, I think for the first time with Ed and Lorraine Warren, might have been the first time that we talked about a possession case. It might have been the same episode. I'm not sure. But you mess around in the shadows enough. You mess around looking for the thing that goes bump in the night, and eventually you're gonna find the thing that goes bump in the night.
I think that's a very sobering thought. I mean, you've talked about it before, but it's just a good idea in general to be wary of such things. Like, I like studying these things because there's something mysterious about them. There's something out there. It's like it's extra normal that doesn't match with everything else. But I have also
Yeah,
never gone out on like a ghost hunt or anything like that, or I haven't like say, hey, if you're here, like come on, let's talk, come at me, bro. Because I don't like inviting trouble. I'm not saying if you're investigating these things on the scene, you're inviting trouble, but it's a lot safer not to head that way. It's a lot better for you not to head that way. And for like you were saying earlier about these kids, it's that perversion of the innocence of course I see a kid in distress. My instinct, because I'm not an antinatalist, is to go to that kid, see what's wrong, and then help them. You know, same thing,
yeah,
woman in distress. There's a part of my brain that goes, oh, woman in distress, that bad, Christian help. You know, you can call me whatever you want on that kind of spectrum, but like there's something ingrained
yeah.
in me that needs to be solved. That there's something that needs to be done there. And for an entity to take advantage of something like that makes perfect sense to me because I'm thinking more, oh, vulnerable kid, vulnerable woman, what have you, instead of I need to be protecting myself. Because why would I think that? Like someone's in need.
Yeah. Yep. So before anything else, like to me, there's the like reason dictates, logic dictates that this one's legit. And I'm one of those folks that believes in a plurality of spiritualists, spiritual entities. Um, I do not believe that everything is straight, like anything that is not an angel or god is straightforward a demon in the purest sense of the phrase. I just don't.
Yes.
I don't think that's what scripture says. I don't think that that's what my experience has said. I think that I would have to shut off a lot of things to get there. Um and so to me, when I hear these stories, yes, there is something enticing about it. Like you said, it's Unsolved Mysteries was a show for a long time for this exact reason. Like a whole generation grew up with that song. Like you still hear that song, that jingle, that beginning of the show Unsolved Mysteries. And for a lot of us, there's a trauma response, right? Like we grew up with stuff like that. And it had the longevity that it did for a reason, because people like exploring the unexplained. People like exploring the mysterious. But actions have consequences. They just do. When you go far enough into this thing, actions have consequences. So as you see, or as you saw before on the screen, that was a picture of Brian Bethel. That is, yeah, that is the gentleman who reported the sighting in the 90s. The particular reading that I made was not he also had a friend with him, or there was another person that was like connected to him or something like that, who said that he also had an experience
He was alone the initial night, if I remember the report correctly. And I think that friend came to him later on.
later on. Okay. Um so the thing that I want to point out here is, so in the late 90s, yes, proto internet, and by proto internet I mean like internet 2.0. Like we're not talking war dialing, DOS, MS-DOS sort of level anymore. That like was like the late 80s. And so like we're at home computers, we're post Windows 95 at this point. But we're still talking like, in comparison to 99, 2000 and forward, like we're talking about like the beginning stages of the internet. We're just starting to crack the shell of what really the internet would become. And so yes, there are online forums, yes, there are online message boards, sure, but it's not the same. Like, no, they're not sitting there reading by candlelight. Like, we're not talking about the Stone Ages, but we're also not talking about the same level of dissemination of information and widespread storytelling that we have now, or that we would even have 4 or 5 years removed from when this first became a thing. We're not like, people aren't making videos at the drop of a dime. People aren't that that hasn't been popularized to go out onto the internet and go posting fake stories that would turn into copy and paste phenomena. That's just not the time period that we're in. And so I think when you start to talk about, oh, okay, so this dude comes forward and suddenly everybody and their mother, and then what about England? England seems like it's a hot spot. You want to make sure that you avoid all of the 87 hellmouths that are in England because black-eyed children seem like they're everywhere. You know what I mean? Like that's what some of the pop media would have you believe, but like if you when we're going back to 96, we're still talking like Art Bell Coast to Coast era. We're not talking like Reddit and YouTube era. And so the fact that there are so many people who hear this and are like, ah, I've been there, I've experienced this, and all of that, I just think it carries more cachet to it than um than like than drawing skepticism for me.
I mean, I once again agree completely. It's the wild west of the new internet. Things are being figured out. Forms are being figured out. Like, who can you trust on them? And then stories like this crop up. Well, of course, other people are gonna bring up their own encounters because why would they want to be the first? Everyone would think they're crazy. And now we have that initial. It's not the first sighting, but it's the one that popularized it as far as the internet is concerned. So that happens all the time in cryptid cases, hauntings, demonic possession cases, what have you. Is someone is bold enough to speak, and then someone else says, "I also saw the same thing, and I was scared because I didn't want people to think I was crazy. I didn't want to lose my job or what have you." And one of the benefits and also one of the detriments of of just internet in general is the anonymity that it can provide. So while he puts his name out there from the very beginning, other people say, "Hey, I don't feel comfortable putting my name out there, but this is what I saw." And you can either believe him or not. And that's
Yeah.
fine.
And the I think part of the story that needs to be told is setting this in the historical context that it lives in. So, I don't know about you, Christian, but I am of a particular vintage that I remember pre Blair Witch Project and post Blair Witch Project.
Yes,
Now,
most definitely.
right. So you youngins out there, you that were born, post 2000, it's hard to believe this, but seriously, the Blair like people were convinced that the Blair
It
Witch
was real.
Project, yeah, like everybody and their mother was very convinced that this was a very real thing because their marketing efforts were absolutely amazing. They
Chef's kiss.
unfortunately, like if you come to find out what the movie studio was able to pull off by the agreement that they had those three actors sign, it is devastating because they will never see an eighth of the royalties,
Oh my
respect,
gosh.
income, any of that sort of stuff from that phenomena. They will not because they basically signed away all of their rights, but in turn, that's part of the reason it's like a double-edged sword, right? Like they took one so that way this movie would blow up because they basically signed away their ability to show up on anything, and then the marketing team starts putting out like missing posters and uses their real names and puts out a website that says that they're all dead and all of this sort of stuff that really like turn this into in all meaning of the phrase phenomena. And every single like there were so many movies that came out afterwards that tried to capture that energy, that tried to recapture the lightning in the bottle. And having been on the burgeoning front of this whole world getting popularized, it really wasn't until the mid aughts when ghost hunting shows and then paranormal activity which was the next one of really hard hitting found footage, well done, all of that sort of stuff. That was when it like skyrocketed. Paranormal State, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventure, the whole nine yards. Like there was 87 of these shows, and all of that, and it really became again a phenomena, and that's where it became popular. Before that point, it was only just like, ooh, you talk about some spooky stuff and fine, but it still wasn't in vogue to step forward and say that you believed in ghosts. You still got ostracized. You still were a weirdo for thinking about these kinds of things. It was not commonplace, comfortable to be able to step forward and say, "Oh, I saw this spirit. I saw this thing." You were looked at like you were nuts by stepping forward and saying these things. And so there are many of us that have had plenty of experiences pre mid 2000s, but only started coming out after the big tentpole movies and stuff like that were coming out, that because that was really the first time that it was safe.
Oh yeah. I just remember that time very vividly of like just hearing on the playground, like, have you heard that there's this movie, it's about this real thing that happened. It was like a witch and she murdered these kids. And I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. And that was still that was still in the phase of my life where everything horror was bad and I wanted nothing to do with it because I was just a big fraidy cat. Um, but then like I believed that for years until
Yeah.
later on when I go, oh, okay. So they had some very clever
Mhm.
marketing, some great PR out there. This isn't real, but they did their best to actually make it feel like it was real. And the same thing, Paranormal Activity. I was there, with a friend of mine. She and I saw it together. It's like, oh, is this? And I kind of had the moment of, okay, no, they're trying to do it again, but it was still well done.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just a different age. And I mean, you could label it fake news. It really is, but it was done in a way for the sake of entertainment. So when people get into, well, what's so different about, these reports? Is it not someone trying to like get their own spin-off movie based on a black-eyed children, black-eyed kids? Like, well, uh, I've seen movies that have been based off of them. They all kind of suck. It's not done in the same way. The marketing isn't done the same way. It's people capitalizing on the idea way after the fact. And going to back to Brian, he his story has not changed since that day. I've listened to him give interviews multiple times over. It's pretty much beat for beat. Um,
Yep.
he may like slip in a new word every now and then, but that's because hey, like you don't remember everything you said the last time. This isn't done in an intentional
Right.
way to obfuscate or anything. Like I do legitimately believe this man that he saw something and it terrified him and it messed him up. Now, what the heck that thing is, we can debate that in a bit. So yeah, just put yourself back
Yeah.
in that time if you can. If you're younger than that, it's kind of hard to do that. It's not your fault. You were just born, too late.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
In a post in a post pulling the rabbit out of the hat moment, in a post world of seeing how it's all made, it's hard to put yourself back there because in some ways you become desensitized. And in other ways, other folks that have tried to recreate that magic have made it very hard to go back there, because a lot of these TV shows, a lot of these real life accounts and things like that are have been proven to be garbage. They've been proven to be fake or rigged or whatever. And it's hard when you have a moneymaker and then a whole bunch of people that are trying to capitalize on that they, you know, it muddies the waters in believing anything. Like, can you believe anything when you have enough people who come out here and you know present something that is less than truthful? So,
Yeah.
we have eh, other stories too, as far as like black-eyed children. So we talked about, different accounts that started popping up, and a whole bunch of people from all over the world started coming out with their own stories. A couple that I had found in my research for this was a couple that was in a snowstorm in Vermont, that in the midst of the snowstorm they came across two children who were out in the snow, and asked them if they could get a ride. And like the couple stops and they're like, yeah, this seems like this is, that this is a snowstorm. It's kids, and this makes sense to give them a ride. And they said that there was like an airiness, an ethereal nature to their voice as they're talking to these kids, and that they couldn't answer their questions, like they were confused, like they couldn't give them a straight answer. And then they saw their eyes, and the lack of expression in their eyes, and the color of their eyes. And they said they they sped away, and kind of left them there, and still to this day they question whether or not. And that, could be, that's again one that stood out to me. Another one that I found on Reddit was from somebody who was hiking in the Appalachian Mountains, that found a cave, and goes inside this cave, and there's a kid in the cave. And he said that there was just a weightiness in the cave, and this kid asked if he could join him. And he had said that he grew up as a spiritualist, and was very well aware of evil spirits and things like that, and so said absolutely not, went the other direction, never saw the kid again after that fact. And so there are there are plenty of different flavors of this same phenomena, but again, like, the commonalities to me speak to credibility. They don't necessarily speak to a a falsehood in these
Yes.
things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's classic story for a reason. It enhances the creepiness factor, but the consistency is something that I don't feel too bad about accepting. It does make me question a little bit because, like, at least the amount of stories that have come out kind of stretch credulity a bit. So, like, getting you through the weeds of, okay, who made this because they're actually talking about an experience, who made this because they're trying to be internet famous, and who's doing this just for the sake of a joke. You always got to question that anyway. So, um, just using the tropes to this story consistently, you just got to worry about what the story is actually saying. Who's providing it? Is it just some anonymous guy or gal? Is it someone who's willing to put their name out there, or is it someone who's like, I am terrified. I'm not going to put my name out there. You can believe me or not. And for them, it's this idea of just getting inside whatever you're in, house, car, what have you. It's like, well, why? What is the purpose of doing that? And in some of the reports, people just feel like they're being drained emotionally, like some kind of psychic vampire is going after them, and that's its own separate thing, or maybe it's part of this. Who knows? And there's clearly a purpose behind it, and I think you want to wait for that question for what happens when we let them in a bit, or you have something else you want to say.
Yeah, so I think, I think it for as much as we focus on the similarities, I think it's worth also talking about some of the differences in some of these accounts, because not all of them are multiple kids. Some of them are one. Some of them appear during times of distress. Some of them just appear in certain locations, like a farmhouse. So I want to take you all back. Oh, probably about 15 years or so. And a friend of mine says, at this point, this is the height of my time as a paranormal investigator, demonologist, which is hilarious because I didn't actually have a relationship with Christ, but I fancied myself a demonologist. That would actually be the thing that would drag me right into the heart of finding the things that goes bump in the night. But I digress. So, a friend of ours lives on this farmland, lives in this farmhouse. He says the whole thing is really, really haunted, and he keeps it's really messing with him, and he keeps feeling this malevolent presence. And his parents are out of town, and he really would like it if we came over and did an investigation. And I'm like, okay, like why not? All of that. We get there, and there's just an eerie silence over everything when we first get there. Just there's no bugs, there's no outside hum that comes with just nature and existence. It is just quiet. And so we're hanging out for a bit. It gets dark. We decide that we're gonna go, and he's like, "Just stay out of the one field, and just be very careful going into the barn. Like those are the two main hotspots." Okay, fine. We go, and it's kind of like a giant horseshoe. And we start at one end, and we're doing the investigation, and we've got um recorders out, and we're doing the whole thing and all of that sort of jazz. And I have like an actual um professional grade EMF detector, not like one that would be used by like an electrician or like a professional tradesman, not like an app on your phone sort of thing. So it's like, it's full on grade, and we are out in the middle of like the woods. We're kind of at this middle point of the horseshoe. So we come down this side, and it's creepy. There's its ambiance, it's the whole 9 yards. And I'm starting to think, oh, there must not be anything going on here. There must just be, the woods can do weird things to your mind, and all of this sort of stuff. And living out in the country, there's a lot of folklore that go along with different areas and things like that. Okay, no problem. Especially on the East Coast, especially in the Northeast. There's a lot of folklore out here. Okay, so we get here, and all of a sudden we get to these row of trees, and this thing starts lighting up like a Christmas tree. This thing, now mind you, we're the trees. Like we are in the forest. There's nothing that should have been going off. Also, side note for any skeptics that are watching, none of our phones are on us for this exact reason. Because for anybody who doesn't know, you could get a phone call, and older model phones will send that thing off like a Christmas tree. We made it a point that anytime that we went out on an investigation, we tried to eliminate as many false flags as absolutely possible, right? And we're in this horseshoe, we're coming around the corner, and then all of a sudden off there's the field that's kind of now off to the corner from us, and we start hearing drum beats, but not like somebody playing on like a rock band drum kit. No, like single drum, and it's all very rhythmic. And then we start hearing footsteps, all very rhythmic, in line with the drum beats. And so this thing finally stops. A hush goes over everything, and off in the distance we see a kid running past. And now none of us are saying anything to each other because we're both like, what in the wide world of sports? And then we got another guy that's like off over like separate from us. So like there's two of us over here that we're just both like, did we just both see that? Like thinking to ourselves. But like then we've got this other guy who's off, looking at something else. And we finally all come back together and realize we all experienced a similar thing, but in different in different areas. And so we keep pressing forward, we keep pressing forward, and we are now like parallel with the field, and now the barn is in front of us, and we start hearing what is basically like yowling, like tribal yowling. Now, where I'm from, there is a history of indigenous peoples. So, for sake of this conversation, I will be using the phrase indigenous peoples. I'm using it in the purest sense of the phrase because that is part of the history in certain parts of this area. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like indigenous peoples and some of their ceremonial um like routines and rituals and things like that. And so we start to hear this like crescendoing, and we start to see this light come into focus in the barn, and this tall man is standing in the barn. And so us being in our 20s and full of piss and vinegar, we're like, so we have to set up equipment in this barn, like that's just what it is. And so we did, and we did some EVP work in there like while we were in there, but then we set up some recorders in there, left them in there, all of that sort of jazz. First we hear running, like little kid running, like the pitter patter of kids, and we hear, hey, hey, can you help me? And we hear this a couple of times, hey, can you help me, from a young voice. Silence for a minute, and then large, powerful footprints and a man yelling, "Get out." And then we go pick up the stuff. Now mind you, we had no idea, like again, we left it like we had listened to it after the fact, and that's how we learned what was on the recording. But at the time we had no idea. We come back out, and there is like marching with candlelight coming towards us from down in the horseshoe. So the house is on the other side of the road. You walk and you can get to the barn pretty immediately without going through. You kind of have to intentionally go through the horseshoe. And so we go straight to the barn because we had already done the horseshoe, and we look down into the horseshoe, and we see candlelight and rhythmic syncopated walking coming towards us. And like that was like, we're good. And so we come back over to the house, we listen to the stuff, we hear the things. But then after we've listened to it and we're talking about it, we start to hear knocking at the window, and we start to hear giggling from outside of the window. Now, at that point, we had like all of us being spiritualists in our own right, in different forms, in different ways, and things like that. We had all kind of landed in the common ground of, now, purebred classical theists here, uh, understand that I get it. Like I get it now as a pastor and all of that sort of stuff. So like, set your theology aside for a second and just enjoy the ride that we're on here. But like, we had all landed on evil spirit looking for help, evil spirit that is trying to get our attention, not welcoming it. Whatever that evil spirit is, whatever it is, just understanding at a universal level, we do not welcome you. We are not giving you a safe place or asylum or any of those kinds of things, and making it known that you are not welcome. And that's basically what we did. And after that point happened, that was when the knocking stopped. So at the time, we had come to the conclusion that it was essentially like this area that we were in was like a nexus portal sort of deal. Like there are points where electromagnetic activity are that they're it's higher. That's just how the earth is situated, that there are physical points in reality that electromagnetic activity is at a heightened level, and the theory is that because of that, it is more of an open door for spirits to be able to come in. Now, what exactly those spirits are, your mileage may vary. Are they humans? Are they not? Are they something else? Whatever the case may be, that's open to debate and interpretation and all of that. But that was one of those situations that that's one of those landmark ones that I still point to as like, yeah, no, there's a reason why. And that's not like ever since moving back to this area, I'm well known enough that people know me as within this community. If I wanted a position within this community of people, I would be able to have it in a second. But I don't, because I don't need to go traipsing through and running headlong into. I have nothing more to prove. And what happens if I bring something home? What happens if all hell breaks loose because I went out curious about something and brought home a stray?
Sorry, I lost you there for a second on my end. Yeah. Wow. Well, first off, I'm going to get whatever funding you need to greenlight light the next Phantasm movie, because that was spectacular. Tall man, short people around. I mean, it sounds like it to me. Um, but yeah, this is a fantastic story. A very humbling one too, in many regards. Like you guys were completely and utterly vulnerable in that scenario, and yeah, I can only imagine being out there in the midst of all that, dealing with this mess. So, do you feel like you were they were attempting to? How do I want to word this? Yeah, do you feel like they were attempting to get closer to you in any way, or they were just like being standoffish and just like feeding off of fear or something like that? Do you get a sense of that at all?
I got the sense that every single entity, and I'll use that word because I think in some folks' minds they hear the word spirit and they automatically go to human spirit. Like they
Mm.
automatically go there. So I'll use entity. I think every single entity that we encountered was had the same express desire to elicit fear, intimidation, and saw us as adversarial, almost in a way that was looking to leech from us and take something from us, almost like they felt jealous
Hmm.
of what, like that, the fact that like this is still their land, this is still their space, and we have invaded their space. Or that, we knowing that even though it is not their space, we have something that they want or desire, and by in the best way to try and garner that is out of fear and intimidation.
Yeah, we're not getting into the explanations of what these could be yet, but that does sound. One thing that people do put forward as a possibility is this being jinn or something similar to the jinn of Islamic folklore, and that's not my area of expertise, but I do know enough to say that they are beings created also like humans, but they also have free will, but they themselves are on neither side of the equation, when it comes to Allah and Shaitan. So there's this idea of them like not liking humanity because we have the ability, in the Islamic view of things, of meeting with Allah, of meeting with the Creator, God, in that sense, that is just barred from them for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't pick a side. I can't remember the exact mythology off the top of my head. So that's just something that sparked a memory as you were saying your story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so and that kind of goes into I'll throw this out as a primer for anybody who wants to hear more about this. We do have a religious weirdness category that we cover, but um man, there's three big Abrahamic religions, and if we're able to get out of our over ourselves and not immediately try to cast the killing blow against the heretical enemy and all of that sort of stuff, and we start to take a look at the three major Abrahamic religions, yes, theologically, as far as the deity of God and all of that sort of stuff, there are clear differentiations. There is a clear division point between the three. But even with that clear division point, not that I believe that every single piece of Islamic mythology is real, not that I necessarily think that every single piece of Jewish mythology is real, not that I necessarily think that every single piece of extra biblical Christian mythology is real.
Mhm.
But I do think it's worth noting that there is commonality in some of these spiritual or supernatural entities that each one of them claim to have as a part of their specific spin on the Abrahamic religion. And so I just think it's interesting. You know what I mean? Like I think if we are able to posture ourselves in a way that says we know like a fraction of what the big picture is, then we are a lot better off for being humble and all of that. And I think that there is a world where you have to take into consideration, like, yes, there are some people who are trying to make a buck off of a story or trying to get famous off of a story or whatever, and there are some people that will just jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, I want to be one of the people who has claimed that they've seen whatever. And don't get me wrong, I've heard it all, y'all. Like being at the heart of this world and being at the heart of investigating and all that sort of jazz. I've heard it all. But I've heard enough and seen enough to be like, either everybody has heard the story and multiple people have elected to lie about it, having experienced it, or there's commonalities.
Yeah, because this is a worldwide phenomenon. It's gained more
Yeah.
traction in more recent years, but I think that's from people actually studying it and learning, okay, well, there's a story from, I don't know, 16th, 17th century of this happening, or, this British farmhouse in the 1960s suffered it. And I'm trying to think, there was one, I can't remember where it happened. I want to say it was America. But this is one of the instances of them actually getting access to the house. It was a woman and her husband. If I'm remembering it correctly, she was pregnant at the time, and she had that sense of unease. But then she still opened the door anyways, and she and her husband woke up several hours later, so they got missing time. They felt like they were emotionally drained, and I've heard multiple versions of the story. So, and just trigger warning for those of you, if you're in the midst of pregnancy, you may want to hear what happens next. She did suffer a miscarriage in the in one of the stories I've read. So there's There seems to be something about these entities, whatever they are, that are hostile in a way to humans, and they seek to upend our lives or just feed off of us in a way that they can't when we're inside the safety of our homes. And by allowing them inside, we've let down that defense, and therefore they have free reign. I don't know how thresholds work. Maybe you only have to say invite them in once, and now it's there forever. You have to move to a new house, or maybe it regenerates over time. Who knows? But this is just something, and I'm all over the place. Sorry, it's the meds talking of just being careful, of not being stupid. Of like, yeah, research these things. If these things are real, then this is something we need to worry about. And I would go back to an earlier point you made that I also agree with. And as far as like the pantheon, the cosmology works here, I'm not one of those God, angels, demons, Satan only kind of people. There are clearly, from reports all over the world, of different types of entities that if you just throw the word demon at them, if you just throw the word angel at them, I think we're doing ourselves a massive disservice because that's far too limiting, number one. But two, it just doesn't sound in character for what some of these things are. And of course, yeah, it would be in character for me for a demonic entity to, take the appearance of a child and psychically feed off of someone else. Sure, but without anything backing up, like, hey, I threw a cross at them or what have you, or I prayed and they went away. I get a little.
Right.
I don't think we're quite there yet. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I agree. So, there are several different explanations as to, you know, trying to explain away both scientific, psychological, and paranormal in nature to try and explain these entities. You have demons, like we talked about, right? Like demonic forces that are taking the form of children to try and invade your space, invade your home, possession, oppression, all of those kinds of things. Then you have vampires. You have this idea that they are basically like psychic vampires that are leeching off of you, that are leeching your life force off of you. You also have the explanation that they are interdimensional beings that are able to go from one plane of existence to another plane of existence. Now, that to me kind of goes along with the spiritual side of it, where like just because they're spiritual doesn't mean like dead. It just means like non-corporeal, or like, you know able to transition from this plane to another plane of existence. You have more classical explanations for some of them, like the case from from the 60s. There were three young children, young girls that were slain in the same area where the sighting happened that you were referencing. And so the thought is is one of them the angry spirit of one of the girls, those sorts of things. um I tend to shy away from, personally, the explanation of human spirit. I think it's something out, like, to me it's that third category, right? I don't think it's demonic, because it's not classical in the same way that demonic is classical. And there's a lot that goes into that, like what exactly that is. And look, it would seem like the way that the trajectory of the voting is going. Tune in next month for more conversations about that, because it looks like we're going to be talking about Aleister Crowley next month. But that's not like little impish mini satans and things like that. That's not classically demonic, but I don't think that this is classically demonic in that way. But I also don't think that it's classically humanoid. I don't think that it's at least not in the pure sense of the phrase. I do think that there is room in the conversation for energies. I do think that there is room in the conversation for residual energy manifesting in the form of either humans that were or like in different shapes and things like that. I think that's part of this conversation. But even outside of the supernatural, you have more paranormal in nature explanations that go into like aliens in disguise and that sort of thing, like aliens that are trying to gain entry and things like that. um I've talked about my own thoughts on aliens before, but I think that this is another one where I think trying to throw aliens at it is just trying to throw another paranormal
It's always
explanation to it.
demons.
I just
It's
don't.
always aliens.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. As far as the idea of them being some kind of like revenant spirit of sorts that's visiting people, sure. I don't hold that one as highly as others. Like, I mean, these things feel more like they're taking the appearance of human beings rather than them actually being human beings that have been maybe corrupted in some
yeah,
fashion, or they have refused to move on because they know what awaits them at the end. Demons, of course, it's the easy cop out answer, but I don't mean to say that like so blithely. It's like, yeah, yeah, I do believe demons are real. We discussed it before on our exorcism episode. Um, but I'm not, the knee jerk reaction is not to attribute something weird to demonic activity because then everything becomes demons and you have a real bad problem, especially if that's not the case. And if it's the case, sure, deal with it that way. Now I've identified what it is. And it definitely does fit an MO of a demonic entity to, want to corrupt humankind because of a hatred of what they lost as a result of the fall. I could get behind that idea, but if we're going like out of a 10, might give that like a 5.5 on the scale.
yeah,
Then,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I still think that even the lowest one, other than aliens, like as far as spiritual explanations go, I think even the lowest spiritual explanation I would still put over any kind of scientific or psychological explanation. So you have things like sleep paralysis, mass hysteria, stuff like that, and that sort of thing to me is in vain with aliens. Like you could sit here and say, oh well, it's like Slender Man, oh well, it's like different urban legends, oh well, it's like this, that, or the other. And to me that's like trying to throw either a specific explanation at them or just trying to discredit them as a whole. And to me, I'm not like that's where you lose me on
Yeah,
the grand idea of all of this.
yeah. Going back to others, psychic vampires, if such a thing exists, I would rank a little higher because multiple times over in the stories, there's always this consistent idea, for the most part, a consistent idea of I felt like I was hypnotically being told to open a door, or it felt like something was about to feed on me. And it's like before it could actually be done, I stopped myself from opening the door. And then we have the stories where people do actually let them in and they feel completely and utterly drained, like their life force has been taken away from them, or they just lose a sense of self to an extent. So I'd throw that one a little higher. Interdimensional beings is vague, but it kind of is because you don't understand. Uh, was this the only dimension that we're actually completely and totally aware of as far as we've explored? And we haven't even explored the
Right.
majority of it. So um, I don't throw that out with the bathwater because I think there could be something to it. Are we talking about an ultra terrestrial of sorts that? in between these different planes of existence is able to head our way, and this is how they feed. Sure, I can get behind that. Government experience. I mean, maybe have we progressed that far beyond MK Ultra, where
Right.
that's what's public information, and we've actually studied millions and billions of dollars on other matters. I can get behind that. Like, if they wanted to study that, they could study beyond other things and use that as like um, a tactic of war. But I'm not. It's definitely way lower on the scale. Maybe like a 3 out of 10.
Right.
Aliens in disguise. It's just like demons, but worse in this specific scenario.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there is some alien entity out there that does feed off of fear or confusion or something like that. But I mean, most of these stories, there's not going to be. Then I saw a light lifting up outside the cornfield and up into the heavens, or uh, someone saying, "Hey, my name is Meat Morp, and I'm here to feed on your psychic energy." Like, I'm putting that about as low as possible. And of course, everyone's favorite, sleep paralysis. It's just the skeptics go to for this didn't happen because you were asleep. Most of these stories are people wide awake and able to move and able to think for themselves. They're not lucid dreaming or anything like that. I throw that under the bus. Mass hysteria, no one's going to see the exact same thing. That's not how our brain chemistry works. Um,
Right.
if we're suffering from something like that, or even if we were under psychotropic drugs, what you're going to see is going to be different than what I see because your brain is different than mine. Maybe we could influence one another. It's like, oh, you're seeing this, and then maybe I could manifest that in my own mind while being affected by this drug of sorts. But I mean, that takes a lot of extra work that you don't have unless you're using it as an explanation.
Yeah.
Now, the one that I do give credence to a lot, to the skeptic side, because that's where I feel on some of these cases, is it's an urban legend. And people, uh, there's an initial report, then someone else tells another story, someone else tells another story. Like the example I gave earlier of what happened to the woman and husband who let them inside. Like I've heard multiple different tellings of that story. So, is it the original story said this, and then someone misremembered something, or they decided to put their own spin on it? Yeah, I can get behind that because the internet is a breeding ground for a lot of these ideas. But I also don't discount them out of the way simply because other people can do that. Because I do see lots of similarities, because I see consistencies there that make sense to me as far as like what would happen if these entities actually existed. Um, yeah,
I agree. I would reasonably say a lot of the same things, but I would add the one caveat that says even if something has an urban legend attached to it, doesn't mean that that urban legend isn't based off of something. Just
yes,
means that somebody else decided to tell their own story based on that concept. That's all.
yeah, I'm with you there. Oh, and the other one, fair folk, um, the idea of the fae coming in, that's classic story for them too, of having to be invited inside, and taking advantage of someone who does because they're tricksters. Sure, if we believe the fair folk are real, and some days I lean toward it, some days I don't. I'd need more evidence before I said either way. But
Yeah.
and we mentioned the gin earlier too. I would put the gin higher on that list, or maybe the American variant of whatever the gin are, or the British equivalent, or what have you, because they actually do exist pre-Islam, from the mythologies of the Arabian people in that area. So, is it just a story, or is it something that they passed legends on? Could be.
Yeah. There and it's worth noting for sake of the conversation that or the story that I told, that there is a flavor of that within the indigenous populace as well. That of
Yes.
that same sort of entity. So it's I this is one of them, the rare occasion where we are pretty much on alignment. I would say I would give it in that same kind of criteria. Same thing with Faye. Like I don't depends on when you ask as to the plausibility and all of that. Do I think that there's something that fits that bill? Yes. Do I necessarily think it's out and out Faye in the purest sense of the phrase? Eh, I don't know about that. but I do think that there is something that is mischievous and trickster in nature to try and get people to stumble or to fall or whatever, the you know what I mean, to like let them in, that sort
Yeah,
of thing. So I think for this one, I land in the space of, yeah, there's absolutely credibility here. The specifics I think is open to interpretation, but I definitely think that there are there's enough of this that makes sense to say that, yeah, this one definitely has some credibility.
yeah, I'm behind that too. Uh, Too many people are saying something that I can't discount it out of hand. Too many of them are from reputable sources, like Brian, Brian, right? The
Mhm.
initial uh, witness. Once again, Matt Man's story hasn't changed. He's kept to it. He's
Yep.
been laughed at off of stages before. He's had people like mess with him at his job. Like, if I'm just making up a story, I'm not taking that. I'm going to go
Yeah,
to
I'm
where
not
people
committing
actually
to the
like me
bit like
again.
that.
No,
Yeah.
like, but no, he has stuck to it. And whatever the heck these entities were, they scared him. They messed with him. They wanted to see Mortal Kombat, but he just didn't chill in the money. Like, their loss.
Yep. Yep. So what I want you guys to do that are watching this is sound off below. Let us know. Have you experienced this phenomena? Is this something that you believe in? Do you think that there is credibility here? I've told my story. For anybody that is just tuning in, go back. I told my story of my experiences here. I think that there's more than enough to deem this one as absolutely credible, absolutely possible, and a strong contender for a very real spiritual entity and an example. I would go as far as to call it an example as to why we need to be spiritually open-minded, because there are more things that we realize that go bump in the night, and closing ourselves off to the existence of different things doesn't make them fake, doesn't make them not exist, makes us woefully and incredibly unprepared for them. So, with that, if you enjoyed today's episode, if you enjoyed everything that we have covered thus far, and you are like, I need to hear more of these two whack jobs talk about more things that go bump in the night, more oddities of this world, we've got you covered. We are at this every month. Next month, Christian, what do we have in store?
All right, next month for the theme of religious strangeness. You, if you've been on the Facebook page for Priest of the Geeks, you had the opportunity to vote, and I'm going to go ahead and call it because it's been more than a day. Your vote is for not Heaven's Gate, like Joe really wanted to do, but it is for Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in the world. And I am excited to get to him. He's one of those people that I know we would never get along in person, but he's a fascinating man. I'd punch him in the face and say, "You're ruining your life and other people." But we'll get into that when it actually happens. So if you get a
Yep.
chance, yeah, just leave a like down below. Comment, please. If you have your own experience, we'd love to share them on the show too. Um, so just feel free to do that. Um, if you're on Apple Podcasts right now, just leave us a review to help us find more people. Joe, take it away.
Yeah. That's, I mean, that about covers it. And make sure that if you want your voice heard and want to be able to contribute to the show and what topics that we cover on a monthly basis, if you head on over to Facebook and you look up Priests to the Geeks, it is the Facebook group for systematic geekology and really, in a lot of ways, the Anazao podcast network as a whole. Every month we do a poll because we want to cover the topics that you want to hear. So, like Christian said, you all have voted for our Aleister Crowley. That'll be next month. Make sure you stay tuned. That's also where we're going to announce when next month's um, show will be taking place as well. But until then, y'all, thank you. Stay spooky. Good night.